Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Cap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome everybody to Season 4, Episode 57 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we help you prevail throughout Week 17, your Fantasy Football Championship, and the rest of the 2024 Fantasy Football season. Hopefully for most of you, there isn't a rest of the 2024 Fantasy Football season because we don't really approve of crazies playing in Week 18 when players are sitting, teams don't care. That's a little bit nuts. So we won't be playing in Week 18, but we will help you guys out if you're still playing in Week 18. As always, I am your host, Nick Giacobbe. Joining me on this lovely Monday morning is Nick Cap. Nick, I know we left off last night texting. I know you had a couple players that you needed to come through for you on Sunday Night Football. I think you also have some implications on Monday Night Football tonight. So how are you feeling heading into Week 17? How many championships are you in or out of at this point?
So I'm going into one championship confirmed last night. Normal league, one quarterback, two running back, two receiver, two flex, defense, kicker. 185 to 183 final score. Getting to the championship there. I lost in the championship in that league last year. Absolutely stressful between me and my opponent. 5 players going in that game. So very, very stressful. I thankfully Baker and that fumble on the last drive, not by Baker, but by Rashad White, that great play from Deron Bland, saved my season because Baker and Evans were on the other side of the ball and they needed 2 more points, which was absolutely horrendously terrifying for my team. And Chase McLaughlin, he had as a kicker. So absolutely horrifying to play against that one. And then tonight I need at least 8 or 9 points from the Packers defense. In a inflated defensive scoring league, the projection right now for the Packers defense is 19, which is absurd. But it can turn out like that. We do not do any point deductions for yards. It all comes down to sacks, fumbles, touchdowns, interceptions, all that good stuff, and then points allowed. So I won the championship in that league last year. So the hope is that we could go back to back there and get some redemption for last year. My redemption one is actually against Nick's brother, Joe, our moderator, who we'll see on Sunday. So as a precursor, I will not be answering some specific questions on our Sunday live show.
Well, did he win the championship last year? Or
no, he did not. He did not. So I lost to someone that's no longer in the league. Funny enough, my opponent last year did not set his lineup, and he played someone that was injured. I needed Jordan Love to score less than, I think, 30 points, and he scored 30, which was his career high in a fantasy football game. He beat me on the final drive of the game. It was absolutely horrible watch.
We've seen that happen a couple times, both on the good side and bad side. Yeah. So I was in 2 playoffs heading into Week 16. I won both of those matchups unless there's a ridiculous score tonight. So first matchup is my Dynasty League. I was facing Jalen Hurts, so I got a little bit bailed out there, but I have 200 points, and he has, I think, 130. He has AJ Brown too, so a little bit of a bailout there, but it still would have been really tough to now top my performance. Jonathan Taylor had a 50-point game, Saquon had 30, so Debo showed up, Burrow and Higgins, so thrilled about that one. I'm gonna have a really tough matchup coming up next week, but we'll worry about that next week. So in the Dynasty Championship, which again I had mortgaged a good chunk of my future to get Saquon, to get Travis Kelce, so hopefully my trades do pay off for me. My other league is a no defense, no kicker league. So I did end up scoring almost 150 points, which is a lot in that league. Wow. I think an average is about 120, 130. So in that league, I mean, I run through my running backs. I have Saquon Barkley and Jahmyr Gibbs. So those two combined for about 55. Not really any bonuses in this league, but Keenan Allen had a big week. Terry McLaurin did great. McMillan, who I was all over last week. My biggest issue is Stafford only scored 6 points, but yeah, I'm up 149 to 108. He has Kendrick Miller. I don't think Kendrick Miller's putting up 40 points tonight, but if he does, you'll see a very sad Nick come later this week. But
you'll see a very angry Nick come. Yes. Maybe if your Twitter feed.
Maybe my Twitter feed, yeah. So between the PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast, we have 3 to 4-ish championships to partake in next week. And hopefully you guys are in your championships as well. We obviously did our Sunday morning live show this past Sunday. And if you watched that and you're a first-time viewer of this weekly recorded podcast version, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we gave you the best advice possible. Hopefully you took our advice, and hopefully you were in your championship as well. It was a very high-scoring fantasy week. And me and Nick's league, the two gentlemen that are advancing, scored 230 and 190. So this is a very, very high-scoring fantasy football week. So hopefully you guys that are listening are still in your championships. And if you are going into your championships, hopefully you join us for our live show this Sunday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram to help you answer those fantasy football questions going into week 17, going into your championship. Like I said, if you're a first-time viewer, this is obviously the Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. We give you 2 shows a week during the week on Tuesdays and Thursdays/Fridays. This week will be a Friday show for you guys, and our live show on Sundays. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon, drop a like on this video. We'd appreciate that. If you're listening on an audio streaming platform, maybe you're on your way to Christmas dinner, thank you for listening on the audio streaming platforms, which is available iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. This is our Tuesday show. On a Tuesday show, we normally give you a waiver wire segment, which does seem to get shorter and shorter as the weeks go on. And then we end our Tuesday show with our top 5 takeaways from that previous week. We're going to switch it up for you guys this week. It's week 17. Championships matter at this point. Not sure how many takeaways we could give you that wouldn't be a takeaway from the season. So we're going to still give you our waiver wire in a minute. And then we're actually going to give you the 12 predictions of Christmas. There are 2 NFL games on Christmas, and there's a Thursday night football game as well. So we have 3 games to play with, the 12 predictions of Christmas. So without further ado, let us jump into the Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. So the week 17 waiver wire. And I do want to give you guys a tip here. So if you're not picking up anybody specifically, maybe you just nobody really like, look at your opponent. How can you play keep away? Does your opponent not have a solid defense? Does your opponent not have a solid kicker? Does your opponent have James Conner, who might not play?
Do they have Jalen Hurts, who might be in concussion protocol and will desperately need a quarterback going into your championship?
Correct. So there are options here for you to play keep away, not just pick up a player to start, but also ensure that your opponent doesn't get a leg up on you. So let's go position by position like we normally do. We give you percentages of where the player is owned in ESPN leagues. We've done ESPN the entirety of the season. We had to choose a platform. Sleeper's wonky with Dynasty and all that. So quarterbacks, Caleb Williams is owned in 44% of ESPN fantasy leagues. He's facing the Seattle Seahawks on Thursday Night Football. Their defense is garbage. Matthew Stafford is owned in 41% of fantasy football leagues, and he's facing the Arizona Cardinals on Sunday. I do want to note the Bears, obviously, they're not really playing for anything, but I mean, Caleb had like over 300 passing yards. I think he was a top 10 quarterback last week. Keenan Allen had a great game. DJ Moore had a decent-ish game. Dunze had a good game. So I think he's very much in play. And Stafford had a terrible game. Like I said, I played Stafford against the Jets. Terrible decision by me that luckily did not backfire. But Stafford's now going up against the Arizona Cardinals in a game that if the Rams win, they do clinch a playoff spot. The Cardinals have nothing to play for. So, Nick, out of these 2 quarterbacks, who do you kind of like, or is there anybody else that maybe you might see on the waiver wire that you might like? We try to do waiver wire less than 50% owned in leagues, and at this point, every other quarterback is basically owned in more than 50%.
Yeah, so I have one person that's not on the list. Of the 2, I do really like Caleb. I like taking advantage of that Seattle defense, and the weapons over there have looked really good the last few weeks. I have someone that's sneaky and very risky, and I'm sure nobody really would want to play, but I am very confident that I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, that he is owned in a lot of leagues in Anthony Richardson. He, over the last 5 weeks, has been on a different level fantasy-wise than we've seen at the start of the season. Last 5 games, 28-13 bad week, 24-17, 22. Rushing attempts in those games, 10-10, 9-7, 9, 5 touchdowns on the ground in his last 5 games. We like to see that rushing upside, and he gets the New York Giants defense, who is not good. We just watched Penix didn't put up a lot of fantasy points, but he did actually look very, very good with those weapons in the game. I think Anthony Richardson might be a very safe floor play if you are missing one Jalen Hurts this week.
He's owned in 53% of fantasy leagues, and I know that because I actually have Anthony Richardson in one of my championship teams, the one that Stafford really messed me up. And so that team, I've had to rotate quarterbacks throughout the year from Caleb, Geno, Stafford, and Anthony Richardson. So my two quarterbacks are Richardson and Stafford. I will be playing Richardson next week. The Seahawks defense is really bad, so I would definitely recommend picking up Caleb if you can. But Stafford in his last 8 games has 15 fantasy points in 6 out of those 8. He has over 20 fantasy points in 3 of them. Stafford's been pretty reliable. Also in those games, his yardage has been pretty good. His touchdowns, he's in multi-touchdown games in 5 of them. So I would give Stafford a shot too if you really do need a quarterback. But I would prefer Caleb against a very, very bad Seahawks defense.
I'll also just throw this in for Stafford because if you look, obviously it's a division game. He played them earlier in the year, and he did not have a great fantasy day. But that was the game right after Puka got hurt and Cooper Kupp got hurt, I believe, on the second drive of the game. So
he did, yes. So he was without his weapons that game.
He was very much, not expecting to be that big down early on in the season. So do not let that hinder your expectations of Stafford.
Correct. On to running backs. Zach Charbonnet is owned in 77% of leagues versus the Bears on Thursday night. And I'm mentioning Charbonnet because we will talk about Charbonnet in the next segment a bit. But if for some reason he's dropped in your league, you need to go pick him up. He should be your number one on the week, I think. If that's only if he's available. Probably isn't. But we would be doing you a disservice if we didn't at least mention that.
Yeah.
Kendre Miller owned in 47% of leagues going up against the Las Vegas Raiders. We don't know what he's done on Monday night, but he should be available. Alexander Madison owned in 7% of leagues going up against the Saints. Amir Abdullah also going up against the Saints, owned in 23% of leagues. Trey Benson owned in 18% of leagues going up against the Rams. He did miss last week due to, I believe, an ankle injury. I don't think he practiced last week, so he may not even play. We don't know about Connor's status, but that is one to at least mention. Again, if your opponent has Connor, you might want to play keep away just in case. So, Nick, I'm not sure what you think about these, but Charbonnet is obviously the number one. I prefer Abdullah over Alexander Madison. I just think you have to play with what's available. If your opponent has Kamara, go get Kendre Miller. If your opponent has Connor, go get Benson. It depends on your league format. I think they're all very rosterable. I'm not sure how many I'd like to actually play in week 17. I'll play Charbonnet. The other ones, I'm not sure who would actually play depending on the situation.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, unless if you are down a running back, I do not want to force any of these guys out there unless if we see Kendre Miller have a great game tonight. Then he might be the one I want to play against Vegas. But I like Nick mentioned, I am not in a rush to grab any of these guys outside of Charbonnet for my team unless it is keep away.
Wide receivers here. Jalen McMillan owned in 33% of leagues going against the Carolina Panthers. I shouted this one from the rooftops for the past 2 or 3 weeks. I said, go get him. 3rd week in a row that he's at 7+ targets, double digits in all 3 of his games. He's getting red zone looks. I think he had like 5 receptions for 60 yards or something. So even without the touchdown, like he would have had like a double digit game or 9 points, something. So on offense that throws the ball a lot, go get McMillan. And Hollywood Brown owned in 29% of leagues going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I know it's a tough matchup, but he had 8 targets in his first return. The Chiefs offense is very fluid, kind of like the Packers in a sense where you don't know who's going to get the ball. I'm not sure if I would play Hollywood Brown next week. I probably wouldn't recommend it, but it does depend on your roster size, your league, et cetera. Maybe Tank Dell was your flex guy and you're in a 14-man league with a 20-point performance that got you to your championship, and now you're without your flex guy, so maybe Hollywood Brown slots in there. But if you're in a 10-man league, I doubt I'll tell you to play Hollywood Brown on a Sunday morning live show. Or I guess I wouldn't be able to if he plays on Christmas. But
yeah, I agree. I agree with you entirely. I wish we saw Hollywood Brown 3 weeks ago and saw that performance. I would have felt a lot better about playing him. Pittsburgh also is a very stout defense, so there's no rush to get him out there. I fully and wholeheartedly agree with Nick. I think McMillan is locked in at this point. He has been phenomenal the last 3 weeks for your fantasy football teams. He's offered a safe floor those 3 games. Carolina is a great defense to take advantage of. I love the opportunity for McMillan, and I think if there's anyone that is on the waiver wire at the receiver position that you can trust based off what we've seen for 3 weeks, it's going to be him.
I'll also note this: if you're in a keeper format or a dynasty format, and McMillan or Charbonnet is available, those would definitely be my first two picks. Sure. I'm not sure how much longer Kenneth Walker is going to be in a Seahawks uniform for, and obviously McMillan might be emerging as the number. Well, I guess Godwin will be back next year, but we'll see. So,
Mhm.
All right, defenses and special teams to stream. Tight end. Chigo Kanawu is owned in 16% of leagues. Will be facing the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's an okay spot start, but I'd hope if you're in your championship that you have a better tight end option. If I'm being particularly honest with you,
Yep.
I would think so. All right, defense is here. The Chargers defense going up against the New England Patriots, the Tennessee defense going against those Jacksonville Jaguars, Indianapolis Colts defense going against the New York Giants, and the Miami defense going up against the Cleveland Browns. I would prioritize the Colts defense. I'm going to face the Colts defense in a matchup next week, and I'm not thrilled about it at all. I bet they're going to put 40 on my head, and they could be the reason I lose. So not thrilled about that. I'd prioritize the Colts, and then after that, I'd probably go Chargers, Tennessee, and then Miami.
I will actually disagree with you here. I'd go Miami number one. I don't think I've seen a worse offense this year in a singular game than I did DTR behind with that Cleveland Browns offense. I thought they looked abysmal. You're going up against the Bengals, who have been one of the worst defenses in football for everyone. I think the coaching staff is not on the hot seat, but really should be for benching Jameis Winston. There was no way you were going to beat the Cincinnati Bengals without Jameis in there. You needed someone that could put up points, even with the risk that it offered. DTR was not good in that game. That offensive line was bad. The holding was bad. The wide receivers did not create enough separation. Like, that offense was really, really bad against the Cincinnati Bengals. I do not see them moving the ball at all against Miami in this spot. And then backing with Nick, 100%. The Giants' offense is another one that's been one of the worst in football over the course of the season. There's no doubt that the Colts should absolutely take advantage of them. It did worry me a little bit watching Mason Rudolph get that comeback that killed the defense over the course of the game, but I don't think the Giants have the talent enough talent to really do that. Obviously, they have some, but I don't think they have the personnel to fully catch up back into a game like this.
All right, we are now going to kick it to a Christmas segment, and it's going to be called the 12 Predictions of Christmas. So this will be the 2 Christmas games and the Thursday Night Football game, giving you guys a little bit of preview for those games. And me and Nick each have 6 predictions. They could be good or bad. They could be about a player, a game, etc. So we have 6 predictions each, so 12 total. So we're going to go game by game. We could kind of just talk about, give our predictions for that singular game. So Chiefs Steelers, Nick, do you have a prediction for this game? If so, give us one prediction.
I have 2. So pretty much the way I did that, I did one for each team. So I'm going to have 2 from each game. I'll start off with the Chiefs, and we're going to be talking about their defense because I think they're going to obliterate the Steelers. This game, we told you probably 6 weeks ago when Russ and that offense was cooking, the over-under was probably going to be set 46, 47 points, something like that. It is at like 40.5. These teams both offenses have not looked great. The Chiefs offense, obviously they're winning games and they've looked good, but the Steelers defense the Steelers offense has been absolutely abysmal without George Pickens. They are rushing to get him back out on that field. But is dealing with a hamstring injury. And the one thing we always know, hamstring and groin, if you're out on that field, you are not at 100% if you have that injury. So even if he does come back, he's going to be seeing Trent McDuffie. That worries me. The Chiefs have been one of the best teams against the running back position. Najee Harris, a guy that has lived on the all-bust team for the last few weeks. 4 of his last 5 games, he's finished outside the top 24 running backs. The last 2 games without George Pickens were even worse. Those 2 games he finished with under 5 points in each of them. And why is that? Because the box has been stacked. Mike Williams is not good enough. Calvin Austin is not good enough. That wide receiving core is not good enough. They really need to make a call to Deontay and bring him back into this offense because this team has been rough. Every defense has put 8 in the box, and the Chiefs don't need to put 8 in the box, but they will, and they will shut down Najee. I don't think there's a pass catcher you can play. Russell Wilson against Denver last season, 0-2, 13 points per game in those 2 matchups. So he, when he was in Denver and was in this division, so he was not a good play. So I really think that there's a lot of holes that Kansas City can take advantage of in this matchup.
So my first takeaway here is that I believe the under is going to hit in this game. The under is at 43, or the over-under is at 43.5. I think there's a lot of reason to believe that under can hit, which will be bad for your fantasy teams. 4 out of 7 of the last Chiefs games have been under 40 points total by both teams. The Chiefs have scored under 30 in 6 of their last 7 games. So the Chiefs are just playing ball where they play defense, don't score a ton of points. As for the Steelers, they have under 20 points total in 10 out of 15 games, including 4 of their last 6. I know they had a couple of good ones against the Bengals and I think the Ravens, but On top of that, the defenses are pretty stout. The Kansas City defense is number 3 in allowed yards, and they're also number 3 in allowed points per game. The Steelers defense is number 11 in allowed yards and number 8 in allowed points per game. So we have two tough, stingy defenses. The only saving grace that Mahomes is absolutely not hurt, but I could see the under hitting, which could be very, very challenging for your fantasy players overall.
Yeah.
So what is your second takeaway from this game?
Now I will give my one shining star to the Steelers offense, and the one guy that I do think can and will cook against Kansas City, and that is Pat Freiermuth. The Muth is Luth, as the younglings would say. And listen, Kansas City, the one spot on their defense where they have been taken advantage of this year is the tight end position. They are top 10 in points allowed there. With the George Pickens injury, the offense has been stagnant, but Pat Freiermuth has finished in the top 10 tight ends for 3 of the last 4 weeks. He has been a big red zone threat as well. He's caught a few touchdowns over those last few games. So I think Pat Freiermuth is one of the more reliable, or probably the most reliable and safest Steeler that you can play in this game. And I think he'll get you to that safe double-digit mark. I'm not going to predict him to boom, but I do think he offers you a safe floor if you are missing a tight end, or if it's a position you've had to rotate over the last few weeks with some of the injuries that have come along.
My shining star over for the Kansas City Chiefs is that I think Xavier Worthy will continue his hot streak. And I'm not super worried about Hollywood Brown, because I like the chemistry that Patrick Mahomes has at Xavier Worthy. And I like how they use Xavier Worthy down near the red zone, especially. He has double-digit fantasy points in 4 out of his last 6 games and 19-plus fantasy points in each of his last 2. He has 6+ targets in 5 of his last 6, including 11 targets in each of his last 2 games. I love the chemistry that he's developed with Mahomes. The other thing is we've seen rookie wide receivers break out later on in the season. That's how Amon-Ra St. Brown broke out. It happens pretty often where the weeks of 10 to 17 is when they finally get their groove and their footing within the NFL, especially going up against tougher defensive backs and tougher defenses. So I think Xavier Worthy will be the shining star for the Chiefs, and could, if you're flexing him, could help you take home that fantasy football championship. Moving on to the second game on Christmas, we have the Ravens at the Texans. This takes place on Wednesday, 4:30 p.m. Both games are on Netflix. Nick, what is your first takeaway from this game? Prediction, I should say, not takeaway. I don't know why I'm saying takeaway. Prediction. 12 predictions of Christmas.
I think that your king, Derrick Henry, is going to stink in this game. So let's get into it, and why Derrick Henry has not been great for fantasy. He has been a very efficient runner, but the last 4 games he has not scored a touchdown. We know he gets no work in the passing game, so it has been entirely reliant on his total yards and his touchdowns, and he has not gotten touchdowns. Now, I know what you're thinking. Derrick Henry was a tight end, and he absolutely always took advantage of those staunch Texans. Well, guess what? Last year, I was all over Derrick Henry before the season. Nick, do you remember why I wanted Derrick Henry before the season?
Playoff schedule.
A playoff schedule. He was going up against the Texans twice in the playoffs, a team he had averaged over 22 points per game. He averaged close in the 4 games or 5 or 6 games, I forget what the span was, before 2023. He was averaging over 200 yards a game and 2 touchdowns per game against the Texans. It's the craziest streak that anyone's ever taken advantage of. So you might think that's a good upside. But last year, Nick, he played 2 games against the Texans in the playoffs. Nick, what is your prediction for how many total points he scored in those 2 games?
15.
9.2. It was his worst games of the year. It was absolutely horrendous. The Texans defense is still very good against the running back position. I think they are going to halt Derrick Henry, and I think that Lamar, while they push for his MVP case for him to win his number 3, he has been a great and very efficient passer, and the Texans have not been good against the quarterback position this year. I think Lamar is going to have the better game, and I think Derrick Henry is going to be the odd man out in this one.
So I actually think the odd man out is going to be Mr. Mark Andrews. The Texans haven't really played well defensively as of late. However, they do allow the 8th fewest points to tight ends, an average of 8.2 per game. Mark Andrews has been very, very reliable. His last 4 games, he's over double-digit fantasy points. He has over 15 in 2 of them. He has become reliable after becoming a guy that you wanted to cut by week 4. However, I think this will be the Lamar game. I do agree with Nick's Henry take, but I think Lamar is going to have a big game, both rushing and passing. And Andrews might be the guy that's kind of doubled up and maybe likely gets more involved in the passing game. Bateman's kind of come out of his shell. Obviously, Zay Flowers is still there, but I think those will be your bigger stars of this game and not Mark Andrews. Your second takeaway or your second prediction for this one. I keep saying takeaway.
We're used to it. Usually this show is all takeaway.
This is normally the takeaway show. Correct. This is normally the takeaway episode of the week.
That's all right. So I think that Nico Collins is going to have a massive game. His last 4 games, his target share has been 9, 11, 6, and 10. Very, very solid. And Baltimore allows top 3 points per game to the wide receiver position. Obviously, Tank Dell suffered the horrible injury this past week. And now it's going to have to be the Nico Collins show in this one. I think that he will absolutely take advantage of the Ravens in what should be the game out of these 3 games, the 2 on Christmas and the Thursday night game. I think that this is the most primed, biggest opportunity for any team, any matchup to really be the over between the Texans and the Ravens. I think Nico Collins will be the biggest benefactor from any skill position player between the 2 games in this one.
So I back Nick's case there because I think both CJ Stroud and Lamar Jackson will be top 10 quarterbacks on the week. I think Lamar could be your quarterback 1. I think Stroud could get as close as quarterback 5. The Ravens allow the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks, an average of 21.3 per game, and the most points to wide receivers, an average of 33.8 per game. So that is a great opportunity for both Nico Collins and CJ Stroud. The Texans, on the other hand, allow the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, an average of 18.7 per game, and the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers, an average of 31.7. Lamar's been your quarterback 1 on the season. He's going to run away with that. And Stroud has a positive matchup. He had 18 fantasy points against the Chiefs on Saturday. He looked good. I know he's kind of disappointed based on his ADP. He was technically a bust, but if you did get to your championship at CJ Stroud, I think he'll come up for you. The Ravens D to back CJ Stroud over the last 6 weeks has allowed 16.4 to Russell Wilson, 24.2 to Jalen Hurts, and 29 to Burrow. I picked those 3 because those are notable quarterbacks who can sling the rock. I didn't bring the Giants game into it. Russ had one bad game against them too. But I think Stroud and Lamar will both have very, very good top 10 performances against those defenses. So moving on to Thursday Night Football, the Bears at the Seahawks, and these will be our last 4 takeaways. Predictions. Correct. I am just, it's almost like when you're typing away on your phone and like, you know where the buttons are at this point. I'm on autopilot. Sure. All right. Your first takeaway from the prediction. You know what? I'm saying takeaways from now on. We're just going with it. Sure. It's a takeaway. All right. Bears and Seahawks prediction.
All right. Nick, I hate to tell you this. I think that the Seattle Seahawks offense is going to look horrendous in this
I think you're right.
matchup.
I think you're right.
The Bears defense is elite at pretty much every layer, not so much the running backs, but everywhere else on the defense. They are the second best team against the quarterback position. Geno Smith has stunk this season. He has the 4th most passing attempts in football, and with the 4th most passing attempts, he has 17 touchdowns. That is absolutely horrendous, and 15 interceptions. Very, very bad. I do not think that there is any chance that you could play him in this matchup, and he should probably be on the waiver wire at this point. I would actually drop him now, so this way you could, if your opponent does need a quarterback, you try and bait him into picking up Geno Smith to play against you. That's another good strategy. If you see your opponent has a need and there's someone you want them to play that you have on your team, go for it. There's a shot that they always pick them up. And anyways, they're the 9th best team against the wide receiver position. DK got his long-awaited touchdown. We talked about it on the Sunday show. He was due. It took him 8 or 9 games. He finally got there. But Jalen Johnson is one of the best corners in football. JSN definitely offers a safe floor with how good he has been over the course of the season. And Jalen Johnson should be seeing DK. But I do not think that JSN is going to explode because I think Geno is really going to struggle behind his offensive line against that front 7 of the Chicago Bears. I think if they want to win this game, it is going to have to be on the ground. So I do think you have to temper the expectations on the receivers, and there is no shot you play Geno Smith in this one.
My takeaway is that DK Metcalf should be benched, facing the Bears defense, who allow the 3rd fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. This is a league-losing play here for DK Metcalf. He's under 10 fantasy points in 3 of his last 5 matchups. Kind of needed a touchdown to save him this past Sunday. As much as I love DK and love watching him as a Seahawks fan, he should be benched, or you're probably going to lose your fantasy championship. Your second prediction for this game.
There you go. We got it when we got to number 11. I think Caleb Williams is absolutely going to torch the Seattle Seahawks. I don't know what the betting line is on this game, but I think the Bears are probably
the betting line
underdog.
was not out. I did want to put all the betting lines and the over-unders. Actually, there's a Seattle minus 3.5 and an over-under 43.5.
I definitely love Chicago to cover if it's 3.5. But I would bet them outright to win as well. I think Caleb Williams is going to cook them. In 3 of his last 5 games, he's finished as a top 10 quarterback in your fantasy football leagues. 2 of those in the top 5. His last 5 games, 10 touchdowns, 0 picks. He actually has 0 interceptions in his last 9 games, which is kind of crazy to think about for a rookie quarterback. I think this is a great spot for Caleb. It is a short week. Seattle is not a very good team. They have to travel from Seattle on a short week to Chicago. I think it's a very good spot for him and this team to kind of show him off right before the end of the season. It's prime time. No one's going to be paying attention to his matchup next week in week 18. It's not in a prime slot. There's no reason to. So I think Caleb's going to show off all his talent, all his arm, and make his pitch for his next offensive coordinator and head coach to come in. Since the offensive coach and head coaching change, we've also seen a lot of these weapons do well. Keenan Allen, I actually was shocked when I was looking up these numbers. 4 of his last 5 games, he has over 20 points, including 3 top 5 wide receiver finishes, and DJ Moore has 6 straight double-digit games. So both of these weapons have been very, very reliable. If you watch Red Zone, you've also seen Rome Odunze make a couple big plays, pick up some first downs. He's not been as reliable for fantasy, but there's a lot of weapons on this team and a lot of passing attempts to go around. So I think Caleb's going to cook, and I think if he is on your waiver wire, I didn't plug it there. That's why I wanted to plug Anthony Richardson. I absolutely love the Caleb pickup and play here.
I was just looking at the top 30 wide receivers. One of my predictions before the season was I think that 4 of the 6 Bears and Texans wide receivers would make the top 25, I think. Right now we have Keenan Allen at 30. We have Nico Collins at 22. And we have DJ Moore at 14. It's unfortunate that Diggs got hurt because Diggs was a top 25 receiver. But I think my prediction...
Diggs was top 10 when he got hurt.
I think my prediction would have came true if Diggs had stayed healthy. That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But
Nico probably would have finished top 10 if he didn't get hurt.
Yes, that was unfortunate.
It was spot on.
All right, my last takeaway here is a positive glimpse for the Seahawks offense. I think Zach Charbonnet can win you a fantasy football championship. Kenneth Walker ran out with an ankle injury late in Sunday's game. I don't think he's going to play 4 days to come off an ankle injury. The x-rays were negative, I think, but it's probably a high ankle sprain is my guess, so he probably won't play Thursday. On top of the fact that he's going to have the opportunity, the Bears allow the 4th most fantasy points to running backs. Charbonnet has double-digit fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. And if you look at his last 4 games and total up his points, he has more fantasy points than Kenneth Walker does when both of them have been on the field. So I think it's a great opportunity for Charbonnet. If Charbonnet plays these last 2 games and Walker doesn't, the Seahawks have some really tough decisions. I believe Walker has a year left on his contract, or maybe they could do the 5th-year option. I forget, but this could be a really eye-opening performance here to see what they want to do with their running back room going forward from a guy like Walker, who is talented, but he has spent a lot of time off the field with his tenure with the Seahawks. But point being, if you have Charbonnet on your bench, you hit the sweepstakes if you're in your championship, and if he's available on your waiver wire, go get him. I legitimately think he could win you a fantasy football championship this week. All right, that is our first show for Week 17 Championship Week. If you enjoyed it and you're watching on YouTube, smash that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel and hit the bell icon so you get notifications every time we go live or post a new video. You'll get our next video on Friday. We'll be recording Thursday. So Friday will be our all boom and all bust teams for Week 17. The 9 games on Sunday, the 1 game on Monday, 10 games total to talk about. We'll also have our live show this Sunday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Make sure not to miss that so we answer your fantasy football questions before Championship Sunday. You can support the show on audio streaming platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. Please give us that 5-star rating and the review. It only takes 30 seconds. If you have any other questions, Twitter and Instagram, Primetime FF Pod on Twitter, Instagram, Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. A quick note, you can DM us on Twitter. I do answer the DMs, but it's much easier to get a notification if you actually tweet us, and then other people can also respond, and other people can give you takes as well. So aside from that, we're dropping this episode on Christmas Eve. So if you guys are celebrating Christmas, have a wonderful Christmas. Enjoy the time with the people that you'd like to. Celebrating the other festive holidays going on. Hopefully you do have a festive, Merry Festivus, Happy Holidays, Happy Hanukkah. All the above. Missing a couple of them. I feel like there's a joke one in there.
Happy holiday.
Life Day. Happy holidays to all of you. So thank you guys. Appreciate you guys. I'll talk to you guys on Friday, and let's get ready for championship week.